This is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated Podcast. I'm your host, PWI Senior Writer Al Castle, joined as always by my co-host, Brian Solomon. How's it going?
Going really well. Merry Christmas, guys.
Yes, Merry Christmas to you. And because it is kind of the holiday-themed episode here, probably the last of 2022, we've got a special guest, fellow senior writer, former PWI Editor-in-Chief, Harry Burkett. How's it going, Harry?
Great to be here. Merry Christmas.
Yes.
I feel like this is an annual tradition.
Yeah, do you remember the first PWI podcast Christmas party? We had like effects and everything. We had like office effects. We joked about like, Dan getting drunk in the back or something like that. But I know that
it reminded me of those old. It's like those old I don't know if you remember Wall Street Week on PBS. They would have the year end around New Year's Eve, and they'd have all of these tycoons and the financial analysts come in. They'd all be wearing tuxedos and they'd have drinks, and the thing is they had to fit all that into 22 minutes.
Harry, were you ever in the office through like I don't know if it would have been a PWI Christmas party or a Kappa Christmas party?
They had a party. I believe it was at Mr. Karabats's house. Mr. Karabatz, Nick Karabatz, was the owner of Kappa Publishing. But since my real home was about 160 miles away, I took it to go back home. So I did not attend the Christmas party. But it was kind of glamorous. And, well, all you need to know is Mr. Karabatz had a swimming pool on the second floor.
Wow. That's not bad.
Nice.
And Brian, was there ever, I'm sure there were WWE holiday parties. Was there a WWE magazine holiday party?
There, they have departmental parties now, from what I understand. But back then, we didn't have them because the company party was so amazing that, that was the whole, it was like being at a wedding or something. I mean, they rented a hall. They had a live band. They had like table dinner, the whole thing. Like you could pick your entrees. They had Santa Claus come, which in the early years was Freddie Blassie. Unfortunately, by the time I was going there, it wasn't anymore. I don't know who it was. It was actually the guy that they would have come on occasionally to be Santa Claus in the 90s. I have no idea who that was, but we would have like the kids would have Santa. Like it was elaborate. And from what I understand now, the company has just gotten so big that they don't do that anymore. Now they actually do department parties, but we didn't have them back then.
Would the party that you're talking about, would the talent be at that too? So would you have like office folks mingling with talent?
Usually the talent like that was on the road, the actual like full-time wrestlers typically were not there because like they would be home with their own families. And but who would be there would be like anybody that was like, like Dusty Rhodes would be walking around, Ted DiBiase, I remember seeing, Michael Hayes, like anybody that was affiliated with the TV or the full-time end of things, I guess you could say, they would be there. Triple H would be there. I remember one year, do you remember when they were like hazing the Tough Enough guys, like the Miz and all those guys, and they were having them do embarrassing things? One year, Booker T actually showed up. It was like they ran an angle at the Christmas party. I can't explain it, but Booker T showed up and he had the Miz there. And I forget whoever the other guys were that didn't make it. It was the Miz and the other guys. And they had them do like some goofy Christmas dance because there was actually a dance floor and everything. And they made them do this goofy like Christmas dance for all the employees just to kind of embarrass them as part of their Tough Enough, rite of passage. But, you never know who you might see. Obviously, all the McMahons would be there all the time. It was interesting. I remember one year my daughter was like 2 years old. She spent the whole party sitting on Freddie Blassie's wife's lap, Miyako. She didn't even want to give her back to me. So there would be interesting things like that would happen. My son, who was 2 years old, once tried to tackle Shane McMahon's son on the dance floor, which was a scary moment. They were both 2 years old. I could see my career flashing before my eyes.
Yeah.
Thankfully, everybody was safe. Nothing happened. We intervened. Linda and I intervened and made sure no one got hurt. So
wow, great stories.
Yeah.
And so again, we are here at the end of 2022, and so we're going to be looking back on this episode to what is, I think, a pretty historic year, in part because of the McMahon family, and also talking about the year in AEW and WWE under a new regime. Again, I think a very newsworthy year, and also maybe looking ahead some to what we expect in 2023. So stay tuned. Real quick, I want to talk about the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I haven't gotten it in the mail, right? Hold it up. But it is the Tag Team 100 issue, the last of the trilogy of ranking issues. We're finally done with ranking season. You could get the digital edition now. I don't know if the print one is available yet. It might be in my mailbox by the time I'm done here, but it should be out any moment now. By now, the Usos
Got
are
mine
the
yesterday.
Did you? Okay, good to know. So I should have it in the mailbox later today. By now, the Usos are the number one ranked tag team. First time a WWE tag team has ranked number one. Brian, we talked about this a little bit in the last episode. I expected there might be some controversy, and I got to say, in the end, we talk about how sometimes by the time the magazine comes out, you end up looking bad or you end up looking good. I think we ended up looking pretty good, and there was even some concern about whether, a little behind the scenes stuff, whether we should release the magazine a little early, because FTR was challenging for the AEW Tag Team Championship. I think the day before the magazine was supposed to hit the digital edition, and it just would have been one more point of controversy if now they've got a fourth tag team championship, the big one, and here we picked the Usos. But sure enough, they did not win the tag team championship, and a few days later lost the Ring of Honor tag team championship. And meanwhile, the Usos went and made history and became the longest reigning WWE tag team champions ever. So I think we end up looking pretty good. Harry, I'll ask you, your thoughts on the Usos. Are they the best tag team in the world? Were they in 2022?
I do believe so. It's interesting. We almost used the opposite logic for the PWI 500 a couple years ago when we picked Kane over Roman Reigns, that Omega was the international belt collector. And we used the rationale, well, if PWI thinks these championships mean anything, then Kenny Omega should be number one. Therefore, even though Reigns was the biggest star and a huge factor in WWE, that year Omega got the nod. But this year we kind of used the opposite logic. But I think the difference is, I know you're only supposed to consider what's happened in the past year, but I have to consider the fact that the Usos made history this year by becoming the longest reigning tag team champions, and they added yet another title reign. So I think the whole gravity of that made them the deserving winners, one and done.
Yeah. Do you agree with that, Brian?
Yes, and the difference, because of course I'm thinking about Omega too. The difference is, at least Omega was clearly the number one star in his own company. You know what I mean? You could argue at the time. Whereas the problem that we were faced with FTR, we excuse me, guys, it was a real challenge because it was those two ideas clashing together, like you said. So, where are we going to fall here? So we've got FTR with all these belts, all these championships, but clearly the problem is in AEW, forget about being the number one tag team. I wouldn't even call them the number two. And I hate to say that because I love them, but it's like, you've got the Young Bucks and the Acclaimed, who I both would consider to have been featured above them. It's not their fault. It's the way they're being presented and treated on television. And then you look at the Usos and they are a legitimate main event act. They are in the mix. They're in the hottest storyline in wrestling. And it isn't just that. We're looking at titles. Fine. They're also the longest reigning tag team champions in WWE history. They've wrestled way more in the evaluation period than FTR did. It's like you have to decide what criteria you're going to use in that case. Because, yes, like I've said online, would I rather watch FTR matches any day of the week? Do I think they're a better tag team in the ring, a better working tag team? In my opinion, yes, they are. I think they're like a generational kind of a tag team. But you're talking about the Usos. It would be like saying, well, the Road Warriors, kind of like they're not the best tag team in wrestling, but but how could you not rank them number one? You know what I mean? They're the most dominant. They're presented the best in the ring. They have the best storylines. They're a main event act that gives them clout over teams that you'd rather watch their matches, but they're not at the same level. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I agree with all that. But I'll make the point, and I know you're not saying otherwise. They are a great working tag team, right? So it's not.
Oh no, I'm not saying that they're not. I'm not.
No,
saying
I know. Yeah, I think
saying
they're fantastic. And
yes,
some of the best tag team matches WWE has presented in a long time. And I think to your other point, right? Not only are they positioned higher in their company than FTR are. I think you can argue that they are the biggest act in WWE in as much as they are part of the bloodline. And with Roman working a lighter schedule, they are sort of the face of the bloodline. And so here you've got the biggest act that WWE has had in years. And on any given week, certainly at live events on TV, week in, week out, the Usos are the face of the bloodline and just did incredible work. You know, their work in the ring aside, I think those guys are absolutely leading the industry in terms of promo work and just kind of believability. They're you know, whenever I think about them, the word that comes to mind is authentic, right? Authenticity. Those guys, you know, really the work that Jay and Jamie did really made this whole storyline with Sami Zayn and little things, right? I mean, Jay in the back seething, you know, quietly when, you know, something would happen with Sami. And that's why that payoff at Survivor Series where Jay and Sami hug was so great because Jay had been, you know, sowing those seeds for so long. And Jay's been doing great work in particular. Jimmy's great too, but I think Jay really has been the standout act from back when he was feuding with Roman a couple of years ago. And he did, you know, that was really kind of his breakout role. And he's done nothing but impress me since then. I think he's terrific. And I think this is a very well-earned honor. It's 100 spots this year. We're not going to go through the rest of them, but please go and check out the issue. It's a lot of fun putting together. There's a lot more in this magazine. There's a hot seat interview that I conducted with Ray Phoenix, which is a lot of fun, kind of an experiment. I interviewed one wrestler in Spanish earlier this year for the hot seat, El Hijo de Vikingo. This was the first Spanglish interview because we were kind of going back and forth because sometimes he wouldn't get something in English or he'd have an easier time saying it Spanglish. So that is all to say the audio is unusable, but the interview is a lot of fun. So go check it out. PWI-online.com, starting a whole new year, a perfect time to get a gift subscription for someone. Don't miss any issues. Now we're already at work now at the year-end awards issue. And before that, you know, we're already talking about what we're going to do for WrestleMania. So the machine never stops here at Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Go to PWI-online.com and check it out. All right, let's talk about 2022. Brian, you're sharing your memories of brighter days for Vince McMahon and his family at the WWE holiday party. I don't know if he's going to be in attendance at this year's party, but looks like he's trying to get back. He wants the invite at least. So, I mean, you know, it kind of gets lost in the news cycle, but you know, fair to say one of the biggest, most momentous stories in wrestling history, certainly in our lifetime. You know, Vince McMahon stepped down the end of the Vince McMahon era this year. I'll leave it somewhat open-ended, Harry. How significant was this, and is that your takeaway from 2022? This is the year that Vince McMahon stopped being the most influential person in wrestling.
It's hard to wrap my mind around because I've spent nearly my whole life, at least as a wrestling fan, wondering what that day would be like, how it would manifest itself, how the company would survive, how it would be different. And it's almost as if there are very few news stories, I guess, in life that radically change your life. And, you know, you're kind of expecting the sky to fall in, you know, when you're younger, you're thinking, you know, how's Vince going to go? It's kind of like when Bob Backlund lost the WWF title to the Iron Sheik. You expected the skies to open up and Allah to come down, and it was going to be on the CBS Evening News. But then, like,
this one kind of was.
Everything felt the same the next day. I wonder if it was that way after the moon landing. But I guess this would have been a lot more significant 10 years ago in my mind, or, when Brian worked for the company, or especially the 90s, if he had gone out. I mean, he has created such a corporate empire that it sort of didn't skip a beat without him. It was just a question of creative direction.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, he sort of, I don't want to say marginalized himself, but right. I mean, he created a culture where he was less important. And maybe the bad thing about it is what we noticed about Vince McMahon day in, day out as fans was the negative, right? I mean, more times than not, I think and maybe this wasn't fair, but I think when we were having conversations about Vince McMahon's contributions over the last several years, it was in frustration. It was like, oh, I can't believe he's doing this. But Brian, you were just on the Vice documentary. You did a fantastic job, by the way.
Thank you,
man. So you've got that perspective. Same question. I mean, is that the lasting image of 2022 is Vince McMahon in the headlines, Wall Street Journal, leaving? And Harry, you talked about, I think we all had an idea of what we thought the day would look like. He'd die, right? He'd be dead. It was the only way that he was going to leave. Or maybe you could come up with
or his limo would blow up.
Right. Or maybe you come up with a scenario where he's very elderly and just kind of losing some of his faculties. Even there, I don't know that he would step down. But this was different. There's I'm sure they'd like to cast it some other way, but he left in disgrace.
He did, and that's not, they're not casting it that way. They always use the term stepping away and this sort of thing. But he's been disgraced. And the thing about it is, it's not the first time he's been disgraced in his career, but he always found a way to come back or be bulletproof or bounce back. And I think that the interesting thing here is, to Harry's point, is that it felt like it did not feel untimely at all. It was like, finally was the general consensus. Whereas if something had happened, let's say during the steroid trial in the 90s, it would have been, oh my God, this is like catastrophic. This is the man who's running the place at the peak of his powers and this and that, and now he's gone, and what's going to happen? Now it just sort of feels like, well, all right. I mean, it's about time. Right. The guy is, I'm not ageist or anything, but the guy's pushing 80. His father wasn't even, I don't even believe his father was 70 when his father stepped down and just said, all right, it's yours now. I'm done. I don't want any more of this. And he just seemed, like you said, he was just going to hold on forever. And it just feels like it's past time. Like we kept talking about how out of touch he had seemed and how it didn't seem like the Vince McMahon of the past. And you even would hear that sometimes from people who've known him and worked with him, talking about him years ago compared to now. And it just feels like, as we all know, the stock prices went up, the morale went up, the office morale went up. There's a lot of people who've suddenly gotten a lot of bravery and courage to speak their mind about how discontented they were and how they don't want him to come back, that I don't think they would dare to say even anonymously when he was running the place. So there's this sense of almost relief. You could feel it even in the broadcasts immediately afterwards. Michael Cole was practically doing somersaults on television on commentary. I think we all felt that. So, it was time. It was time. And it took this to do it, which is also why I believe, not to like put my tinfoil hat on or anything, but I really think that this was in part, a calculated thing by whom I don't want or care to say, but to get him out of there. I think this was it wasn't an accident, is what I'm saying.
Clearly, Vince McMahon, doesn't agree that his time should be up. And as you touched on, a lot of stories recently about him trying to get back in, and some questions whether it's possible. I guess he still has majority ownership of the company and has the most voting power on the board. But when that story broke, as you touched on, sort of unanimously, the reaction was, no, we don't want you back. It was very negative. So Harry, do you have concerns that he could come back? And what would that look like?
I think it would be a big step backward. And, for everything I appreciate about Vince McMahon and what he's done for the business, Brian's right. This felt like the right time. And, for a 76 or 77-year-old to come back. I remember in my history class back in college. They kept talking about Santa Anna down in Mexico. And he kept coming back no matter what. He would do one coup after another. And by the end, he only had one leg. He was barely alive, but that's not good. And Vince is obviously not the Vince McMahon he used to be. And I just hate the fact that I'm starting to hear the criticisms of Triple H when I feel like generally the direction of the company and creative is much better, getting rid of some of the gimmicky stuff like the 24/7 title, etc. And we can't expect it to be perfect. We can't expect it to be all NXT quality all the time out of him. He's got to be spread thin too. And we say that about Tony Khan. And I think Vince coming back would be a real morale buster.
Yes.
What do you think is behind that, Brian? Is it just selfishness? Because, by every metric, WWE has done well. I don't want to exaggerate, but I think overall business is up, right? I think TV viewership is up. I think generally, this is somewhat anecdotally, but people are more bullish on the WWE product. Speaking just as a fan and talking to other fans, including us, we think it's better in the post Vince McMahon era. So what is it? Just a matter of he misses it, he's got nothing else to do, and he wants back in, whether it's the best thing for the company or not?
I think it's just, it's the sense of entitlement, which I think you can't argue is unearned. I mean, he created it, he built it. And I know, people could say, well, he inherited it, he got it, but he turned it into something that it completely was not. I mean, it was, just to the 100th power. So effectively, he did build this thing from almost nothing. And so he still feels like this is mine. I mean, it's very easy to understand that view. It's like, look, this is, I'm not slandering him by saying that this is a very self-centered individual. I don't think anyone on earth, including him, would debate that. I mean, the world revolves around him in his mind, and this is his baby. It's his creation. So of course he would feel indignant and outraged and defiant that he was made to leave when he didn't want to leave, which clearly he was. And so, yeah, there's going to be some regret, but I have to say that thing was blown completely out of proportion. I mean, if you actually read the stories, the Wall Street Journal story, there was another story that preceded it. It's like one line in the story where basically it comes off as somebody heard him say this to somebody. It's not like he's launching some campaign. It's like he probably said this to somebody in a casual conversation of, oh, you know what? I never should have left. I probably could have just waited it out. It would have blown over, which is delusional. But like, it's easy to understand how somebody would say that. I don't think he's sitting there going, yes, I'm coming back and this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to make my move. Not even close to that. I think it was really something people latched onto, but that was not even really the news of that day. The news of that day were the news scandals that were breaking, and Rita Chatterton finally filing suit, and then the other spa worker coming out of the woodwork that we never even heard about. Like, those were the real stories. The thing about Vince, having second thoughts was in my mind a little footnote that got blown up, I think, honestly, by a lot of websites that are trying to get hits and clicks. That's what happened.
Yeah. And I do think whether he wants to or not, and maybe he doesn't see this, I just don't see how it's possible,
No.
Working with Fox, working with NBC Universal at Peacock, the guy is just toxic right now. He's untouchable. And it isn't one allegation. It is allegation after allegation after allegation. Many of which have essentially been proven in that there are settlements and all that. So there, a lot of this stuff is not up for debate that this was happening. And sort of the best version of this was, here's a guy who's married 60 years, whose wife is affiliated with the company, who's openly just kind of like gallivanting with other women, and it's not a good look, right? So I just don't see how it's possible. That said, I get why it must kill him. And I've brought this up before, this comparison, but what I always think of is George Lucas and Star Wars after Star Wars. And over the years, there have been some interviews and stuff with George Lucas, and clearly it eats him to his core what's become of Star Wars, right? And it's not necessarily that it's better or worse, whatever. It's just not his. And this was his baby. And he had his vision for it, and now somebody else is taking it and running with it. And I think even maybe more so when WWE is doing well and really clicking, and he sees something like War Games, which the fans really reacted to and was a total positive, but wasn't his vision. It's got to kill him. I wonder if it hurts him more to see WWE succeed than fail in his absence. Yeah, you have a thought on that, Harry?
I don't know. I keep thinking of could we see a return of the higher power?
Oh, God.
The impossible thing I know is it would be great to bring him back as part of a storyline and as a character. And maybe these things are going on. And if you want to have a real threat to the bloodline that turns them babyface, maybe a returning Vince McMahon ripping the mask off, would
don't give them any ideas.
But we know that he cannot just stay as a performer, that he would get involved behind the scenes and he would try to make it his baby again.
I don't even think he's healthy enough to even be just an on-screen performer. I mean, we saw WrestleMania. That was one of the most bizarre and uncomfortable things I think that I will ever not be able to forget in my entire life. It was so strange. But I mean, I don't think he could ever sustain even just becoming an on-air character. Like, let's say what happened to Shane, where they were just like, yeah, now you're just a character on the show. I don't think he could even do that, even if they let him. He's just not physically up to that task.
Yeah. Harry, you touched on some people questioning questioning the job Triple H has done since taking over. And I do think, some months into his run now, we are starting to see not everything has been a home run, right? And I think you see in particular with all the people that he brought back. And I think this was Triple H putting his stamp on things, saying, I disagree with Vince McMahon's vision for these people. And, it's probably almost a dozen people that he's brought back. And granted, we're only a few months in, but you look at the track record of those people, and it's not exactly glowing, right? A lot of those people have not worked out, whether it is, Braun Strowman is sort of middling in the card now. Hit Row's not setting the world on fire. Gargano, who's a terrific wrestler, is out there delivering really uninspired, bad promos and doing some bad TV. Dexter Lumis, and then the biggest one, Bray Wyatt, which, I wasn't surprised about at all, is back to being Bray Wyatt and all the bad stuff that entails. So, Brian, I wonder if there's some part of Vince McMahon thinking, I told you so, right? When it comes to a lot of these people, and does it say something maybe for Vince McMahon's vision and maybe having an eye for something that Triple H doesn't, or is it just early? It's too early to tell, and some of these people may still work out.
I think it's just growing pains, and in the beginning too, there's going to be a lot of Triple H just going like, because look, I really believe we're going to find out in the years to come. I mean, there was a major political power play going on here. And I really think some of this is Triple H doing a victory lap, honestly, and just saying, I won. I'm going to put back all the things that you changed that I didn't agree with. There's going to be a leveling of that, because I really do, like, again, not to get into all the conspiracy stuff, but I really do think that there was a moment there where Triple H, as we all know, was the one who seemed to be getting pushed out of the company. It was very clear, at least out of power. And I can't imagine that Vince McMahon was not involved with that. It was almost like a Godfather 2 scenario with Michael Corleone and Hyman Roth, where he's his mentor, but really, truly, he's not. He's actually trying to eliminate him. And I think I think there was some kind of retaliation thing where now Vince is saying, now you're the one out, I'm the one in. And, I think they gave it back to him essentially because Vince got forced out, because who else is qualified to do it right now? I don't think that he would be back in any kind of power at all right now if Vince McMahon was still running it. So I think part of it is him just trying to hit the reset button. But I don't think there's, people jump to all these conclusions about creative and stuff. Look, the bloodline is on fire. And not only that, but they've done a really smart, good job of having their top angles and their top storylines really dominate the show. So it becomes the main reason you want to watch it. Like, I felt like during the Attitude Era and like that Russo style of booking and the Bischoff style of booking, there was this idea that every single talent needs to be involved in some like incredible epic storyline at all times, where every minute of the show. And I just think that is setting the bar way too high. I think what is it? The high tide lifts all ships. As long as your main storylines, your top angles are on fire, they can carry the show. They can carry audience interest, and that's what we see happening right now. So I think they're in fine shape. It's never going to be perfect. It's way better than it was. And I think in years to come, it's only going to get even better. I mean, I know I'm being optimistic, but I really do believe that when we look back, we're going to go, okay, this was the beginning of something really different and special in the company,
Yeah.
I'm really glad to see the lieutenants coming back, William Regal, Brian James, because I'd like to interject here. You mentioned Vince McMahon's health. I'm concerned about Triple H's health, because it was over a year ago that he had a major cardiac incident, and that's not something you just kind of brush off and you continue with life as before. And he's in his 50s, and he better pace himself.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine his doctors agree taking on this amount of responsibility and stress. He retired from the ring, not that he was particularly active anyway, and that seems like it's completely out of the question. Bumping around with a defibrillator inside your chest, but right, just in terms of the stress and the workload that he's putting on himself. That said, a lot of the stories that we hear are about a less stressful environment and in WWE, and I think it's just the tone that he set from the top. It does seem like people aren't walking on eggshells as much as they did for the 40 years before Triple H was running things. But you mentioned some of the on-air stuff, and maybe we should talk about it. Putting aside who's running things. As far as the product this year, I mean, it really has been the Roman Reigns show, and he's done just an exemplary job of carrying the company. And the certainly since John Cena, now we're getting into the conversation of whether he's actually going to, the mark he leaves is going to be bigger than John Cena. He doesn't have the longevity yet that Cena has. Cena's wrestling in a week or two on TV. So Cena is still Cena. He's still, the conversation of that Mount Rushmore. But Roman is working his way up there with this run. Let's talk about that. And also, at the same time, as great as Roman has been and how he's really kind of made WWE watchable this year, not by himself, I do think that there's reason to be concerned about life after Roman, right? And now there have been some stories that have crept up that maybe he's looking for a break. Maybe he's ready to, get that title off of him. And, we've seen that Roman is a guy who will prioritize his family, his personal life, his health. So I don't know that we're going to get this for that much longer. And if not, what is that next thing? I mean, it is, I don't know that anybody's really lined up to, take the baton and run with it, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, but honestly, not to criticize him or anything, but like, what break would he need? I mean, he hardly wrestles now. I mean, I thought that the whole part-time schedule thing was intended to be his break, because essentially, he's got a lot of time off, and even if he does show up at TV, he does a promo and he's done. And so you would think that would extend the longevity of this, which I think is one of the reasons why. I also agree with you that there isn't anything clearly lined up, and so I don't think that it'll change until there is. Like if Cody comes back and you see where he's at, maybe, although I've heard that they want him back with Seth Rollins, at least in the beginning, maybe when he comes back, sort of like the unfinished business thing. But I feel like that's going to be more like, close the unfinished business, get rid of Rollins, and then move on and move up. That would be the smart way to do it. But aside from him, I have no idea. Obviously, The Rock is not a long-term thing. So what do you do? Does CM Punk come back? Who knows? Stranger things have happened, especially if that's part of the deal. If they say, we will give you, like, you will take over, you'll be the top guy. Maybe that would be enough to get him the incentive to come back. Who knows? I mean, that's wild speculation. But I think until they have something in place, you're going to keep seeing Roman, barring him just kind of putting his foot down and saying, I don't care whether you have someone in place or not, I'm done.
Yeah, I think of San Martino's last run, right, where that's essentially what it came to. If it was up to the McMahons at the time, and I guess this was still Senior at the time, they would have left that belt on him as long as they could. But it got to the point where Bruno was, I need a break, guys. You got to get this thing off of me and get it on somebody else. I wonder if you're right, and certainly Roman doesn't have the schedule that Bruno had back then.
Not at all.
And I would agree with leaving it on Roman. I mean, to me, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think sometimes over the years, promoters have been too quick to move on to that next thing when the thing you have is working quite well. And Harry, if this was April or May of last year, I'd say absolutely Cody is the guy. We finally found the heir apparent who is the next big thing. But then he goes through an injury and it's out of sight, out of mind. He's lost all the momentum. I think it's fair to say he will get some of it back. I mean, if he's a surprise entrant or something in the Rumble, I'm sure the fans are going to go crazy. But I think he'd have some work to do to get back to where he was just in this past spring.
I agree. I mean, if you had to pick someone, let's say Roman just up and quit, Cody is the logical person. But you're right. He's not exactly teed up for it. That's definitely true. When we think of the bloodline, just as a fan, I definitely want to see the chapter 2 of this, which would be a monster babyface run for the faction. Even though babyface factions don't last very long, I think there's some kind of story in here with Sami Zayn turning the whole group. And, I think of Paul Heyman as a late 80s guy. And there was a great TV series back then called Wise Guy. So I think that Heyman is not pulling from The Godfather. He's pulling from this show called Wise Guy with the insider who befriends the head of the family. And then you start to see the better qualities of the head of the family and loyalty amongst each other, where you want to root for the bad guy. And I hope that eventually happens because they got to play for time, because I think even Cody is a long shot for even coming close to filling that void.
Yeah, and short of Cody, I mean, the Rock, if they get him, is going to make for a gigantic business for one show or the shows that they have him for. But obviously, he's not any kind of long-term solution. I don't know.
I don't think he can lose to the Rock at this point.
Right.
My thinking changed as of Survivor Series War Games. Before that time, I still thought, Reigns, he can lose to The Rock and he can come back and they can just continue. But something about that Sami factor has turned this into something extra special where I don't think Roman can afford to lose at WrestleMania.
Yeah. Let me throw out a few other names in no particular order that I would say are kind of in the mix when maybe WWE is looking at life after Roman Reigns. Kevin Owens is one. Obviously they've been trying to position him as some. After working with Steve Austin at WrestleMania, they've tried to build him into a top babyface. I think he's, in that conversation. Maybe he is the top babyface in WWE. That's not saying a whole lot. They're not super strong in the babyface department. Sami Zayn has become one of the biggest things. Now the question is, how much of it works outside this act? Is this something that you could transition into a main event act? I don't know that it is. And I don't know. Then you've got kind of the Drew McIntyres of the world and Seth Rollins and those types. A lot of guys who, in a pinch, could be your traveling world champion and have been, right? So these are all guys who have played that role, but it would be a significant step down from kind of the special attraction that is Roman Reigns.
Yeah, and I think we're all making the case here for the fact that just keep it on him. I mean, that's the argument we're making essentially here is there is no reason other than him not wanting it to take it off him right now. We're just, this has been a welcome break, not the only time, but it's been a welcome break from what's been the conventional booking wisdom of like the last 25 years where you've got to constantly move the title, which I always felt like it's great, but not when you have a person that you don't need to do that with. Like I felt back in the day, I felt that that's something that hurt Austin, for example. He was like the hottest attraction that they ever had in the short-term window, like on fire. If you look at the numbers, house shows, merchandise, ratings, there was no reason to be playing hot potato with the belt when he won it at all. Like this guy, and then he wins it back, and then this guy gets it. And this, they were trying to create compelling TV, fine. But they watered him. He needed to get that thing and run with it and have a run like this. He could have easily held it through the whole Attitude Era and nobody would have complained. So like they're doing now that with Roman, he's an example of somebody where it's like, there's no reason to take it off him. It's compelling TV right now. You can keep it fresh, which they've been doing, change things up, evolve things without switching the title. And they're doing a masterful job. Everything comes to an end eventually, but I still see no reason to end it right now at all.
Yeah, and one of the signs that they really have been doing a great job is that he's taken on a range of different opponents, and in each of those feuds, there was at some point fans thought this might be it. Maybe this is the guy who beats Roman. I mean, you think about Drew McIntyre at Clash of the Castle. You look, it's almost laughable now to think that they would put the title on Drew McIntyre, but people really thought it was going to happen. And I think it's a testament to WWE's creative and to Roman that Logan Paul, these were real questions over the last year. Is this the guy to take the title off of him? And you had pundits, smart ones along the line, make the argument that each of them should have. And obviously they didn't. And I think obviously it was the right move. So, but I do wonder at some point, we're getting back into Kevin Owens, which is now we're getting into reruns, right? We've seen Kevin Owens and right. Roman Reigns. And I imagine we're going to get Seth at some point, and we're going to get, I don't know if it's Bobby Lashley, but it's kind of like the same old characters. At some point, we're not there yet, but at some point, it may be past its freshness date. So I think, Cody Rhodes is very, very important, and it's very important that they get that right because, when I think about lasting memories of 2022, and you think about Cody coming back at WrestleMania and what that was like, it went on to win the ESPY for WWE Moment of the Year, and from there it just kind of grew. And you think of that Hell in a Cell match with Seth Rollins, which is going to go down, and I think it's one of the legendary performances in the history of wrestling. It's kind of a shame that was kind of the end, because we saw the beginning of something special, and I hope he can return to that. But Brian, you were talking about moving titles around. Maybe that's a good transition to the other company, AEW. Are we going into the third year or fourth year of AEW? But to me, clearly, this was the year that the honeymoon was over for AEW for those first 2-3 years. They could do no wrong. They were the darling of the internet and a certain kind of fan. And I think this was the year where some of it was poor decision-making. Some of it was bad breaks. But they were exposed a little. And it's, again, whenever we have these conversations, I have to preface it saying it's still a really, really good product. But we saw some shortfalls this year. The biggest being the debacle with CM Punk and the world title this year. It wasn't the only thing. We saw a lot more world titles come in. There was just like champion on top of championship. Then they started doing interim championships with Thunder Rosa. So I think some of that kind of wore on fans' patience this year. And we saw it in business, right? I mean, WWE clearly got the momentum back this year. AEW's had that momentum for the better part of the last couple of years. This was the year where WWE picked it up. You think about WWE versus WCW, the Monday Night Wars, and there was that point. I mean, I guess it was like 98, 99, where WWE, took over and they never looked back, right? And I'm not saying this is it, but this was the year where there was, if it was a race, WWE pulled ahead a good distance, I think. Harry, what do you think about that?
Well, it really felt a lot like WCW, except it was probably a nice guy in charge. And I think that's been part of Tony Khan's downfall, that he wants a lot of the performers to get exposure, but of course that's diluted the whole product, where there's a lot of people you're not seeing enough of. Like to me, a news story would be the non-factors in AEW. Like Kenny Omega, a former champion who was sort of a historic figure, #1 in the 500. He's part of a trios team. He didn't quite get the big return splash that he deserved. Adam Cole, did he come to AEW? Things like that.
Yeah.
Where are they going to be in some B group? But I don't know what's ahead for them. I think every time you have one of these disruptions like CM Punk or Cody leaving, I think there's an opportunity there for Tony Khan to seize more control of his company. And I think that's what we're going to see. He's been doing it gradually. I think he's been more of a creative factor than anybody assumed he would be from the outset. But I think he's going to go all in, so to speak. And I think in a year's time, I think he'll have firmer grip on what's going on. And I think that'll be a good thing. I say keep the top 25 guys for the AEW roster, put the other 125 in ROH. See what happens.
Yeah, the AEW brand definitely got a little tarnished this year, right? And for those first few years of AEW, kind of like how it's been in the second half of WWE, it was all about who's showing up this week, and that reminds me, also of WCW in its heyday, and it was, the message that fans were getting was AEW is the place to be, and people are leaving WWE in droves to go work for AEW. For one, that well ran dry. I mean, there just was nobody left, and so the last couple of years, the Winter is Coming episode of Dynamite has been one of these like destination viewing things, and this year it kind of came and went, and it was another show of Dynamite, because they really, who is there to bring in? And beyond that, the wave has started going in the other direction, right? Where a lot of these people who just signed over the last couple of years ago, the stories that have come up in the last year is, we want out. Let us out of our contract. We want to go back to WWE. It's a really bad look for AEW. That because it's not even what the message was. With you understood why wrestlers wanted out of WWE, especially if they were sort of marginalized. If you were an Adam Cole that can't even get out of NXT, and Vince McMahon's in charge, but they go to AEW, and that they would want out so quickly after being over there really speaks badly of AEW, I think. And yeah, it just feels like this was the year that a lot of I don't know if I want to say questionable decisions, but the decisions that Tony Khan made, you started seeing some of the results and some of the negative results of that. Brian, do you agree about where AEW's year was at?
Yes, and again, this is another situation where I think in future years we'll really learn a lot more about what's been going on. But you don't need any newsflash to tell you that it's chaos over there. I mean, it's just, you can sense it even in the booking. You can sense it in every bit of news that comes out of their locker rooms. And look, the reality is, when you look at hard numbers and also anecdotal stuff, because I've been to shows and things, they've lost a lot of their audience. I'm not saying they can't get them back, but it's going to be hard, because there's a lot of people that seem to have just checked it out and been like, I'm good, and walked away. If you look at what their numbers were compared to what they're now, I mean, WWE has put distance between the two companies, no doubt about it. And I mean, there are weeks where you can take the rating of, the amount of people who watched Dynamite, add to that the amount of people who watched Rampage, then double that number, and it would be the amount of people who watched SmackDown. No, really.
Right.
And so, like, the illusion, I don't think it's not this neck and neck battle. Maybe it once was, but they're hurting, and something's got to change, because I think what they're doing now is they're whittling down to their core audience that would basically watch a test pattern.
Yeah.
They're going to get to that point. like I've said this before, but I've been to shows where you can even sense. I don't know if you guys have been to their shows, but like you can sometimes sense the demoralization in the crowd at times, where there's like a sense of confusion as to what's happening. There's, people, you're sitting there and you're looking around and you're seeing that 2/3 of the place is empty, and you're going, "Oh, this is not good." Or I've heard people say, "Is CM Punk going to be here tonight?" Like the idea that everybody is tuned in to every little online detail is nonsense. And there are many people there who want to like AEW, who just watch the show every week, and they're going, "What the hell happened to these guys? What happened? I don't understand. Why were the Bucks gone for so long? Where's CM Punk? What's going on? Why is he not the champion anymore?" You have a lot of very confused fans who aren't on Twitter every second of the day,
Yeah. And when AEW was really kind of setting things on fire, one of the conversations was, at what point does this really inspire WWE to put their best foot forward and kind of remind the world of why they are WWE? Kind of what we saw with the Attitude Era in during the Monday Night Wars, and to me, that's what happened this year. Some of that was a product of Vince McMahon leaving, I think, and Triple H getting into the game. No pun intended. With this determination of showing that we are superior and we do this better than anybody else, and I think we saw some of that this year. And one of the places where WWE really kind of moved ahead and separated itself was with star power, which is it's kind of counterintuitive, because when you look at AEW's roster, and it is a lot of big name former WWE stars, and outside of like Roman Reigns, I don't know that you have real mega stars in WWE. I mean, you have some, if you want to put Bray Wyatt and some others, but really kind of transcendent wrestling stars. And something about this year, even these guys who were stars that they were in AEW kind of reduced their stardom, right? So I look at a Bryan Danielson, who was a top guy and should be a top guy. And to me, the AEW version of Bryan Danielson just doesn't mean as much. And I think some of it is a product, I think, of catering to a specific type of fan. And, I think it touches on what you were just saying, Brian, about, there are those hardcores. If you interview Dave Meltzer, and I like Dave a lot, I have a ton of respect for him, AEW is as good as it's always been. And they do something better than anybody else does it, right? But there's something missing there. And I think what WWE has, and it is largely Roman Reigns and the Bloodline, but that package of star power and sports entertainment, it just doesn't exist in AEW, and especially since Punk left. And that's what Punk had, or AEW had early this year and late last year, there was a period there where you could argue that Punk was the biggest star in wrestling. I mean, he was everybody was talking about Punk. He was delivering on the mic. He was delivering on TV. I think even by the time, the whole bottom fell out over the summer, he had already kind of fallen down a couple of steps, in part because of the injury. We forget he won the title and then was gone for 2 months with a foot injury. But he didn't mean as much. And now, they went the route of putting the world title on MJF, a homegrown guy, a guy who they have a lot of high hopes for, reasonably so. But he's not there yet, right? I mean, MJF is not a household name yet. That is the reality. And in retrospect, Harry, I mean, was that the right move? And when we talk about, going back to what you were saying about Roman Reigns, maybe sometimes you just leave the title on someone. I've wondered if that was the thing to do with Jon Moxley, because Moxley was the MVP this year, right? I mean, he was like the old reliable, whatever happened, you could put the title back on Mox, and Mox was like, he embodied AEW. So when they went with MJF, I get that, like, you're trying something new, and Mox in some ways embodies sort of the old AEW, and we're trying to turn a page. But AEW fans love Jon Moxley, and I don't know that it was the time to get the title off him.
I agree. When you have a long-term champion, it just reminds fans there are consequences to the matches. And if you're average champion is only champion for 3 or 4 months, and none of the matches mean as much. I think back to Impact Wrestling or TNA 5, 10, 15 years ago. How many articles did we run? Oh, finally, this is the guy. Magnus. Finally, this is the guy. Eric Young. Bobby Roode came closest, but what TNA was really lacking was a long-term champion to hang your hat on. And AEW hasn't done that. I agree that I don't really think it's MJF's time. I mean, you can have a champion who's your top wrestling champion, but you can also top star. Maybe you can MJF into that. So I think it's a little too soon for MJF. I really don't like seeing him with the world title this early.
Yeah, it feels a little cold. And you think about the year. They started the year with Paige as the champion. It almost feels like 10 years ago. And then they went to Punk. And then Punk went down with an injury. And then they did the interim title. And they put it on Moxley. And then Moxley lost it back to Punk. And then Punk had to be stripped right away. And then they did a tournament. And they went back to Moxley. And now MJF. That is a busy year for a world title in AEW.
And I hope the interim titles go away this year.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's their point.
I think it took me 2 months to realize what an interim champion was.
Well, it's an idea I think that Tony Khan basically stole from MMA, which I guess he is a big fan of. And I think they've even started
MMA.
They've even started doing it in boxing now, as if there were possibly a way that you could water down your titles even worse in boxing than they've been.
Yeah,
but
I
I felt the AEW world title had been booked very, very well right up until Punk got it. And part of that was out of their hands. Right up until Punk got it, for the first couple of years of the company, it was booked in a very patient and effective way where every champion really got to make their mark. It was done well. Everyone at least got a chance. And I think it's been a mess ever since the first time Punk got it. I think I'm a little different from you guys. I do think that this MJF change is potentially a move towards restabilizing the title and making it mean something more again, something that people could chase, having it be, maybe not so much of a chaotic scene, a title picture. I think that's why when there was this groundswell all of a sudden to be like, oh my God, Ricky Starks was so great, we should put the title on him because he had one really great promo. I love Ricky Starks, and I think he can be there. But that was absolutely not the time to change the title, and I'm glad that they did what they did. And he's still hot, he's still going, and that's good. But I think part of what maybe hurt MJF and the title change in a lot of people's eyes, including my own, is the fact that we all know that should have been Punk losing it to him. And if it had been, it would have been 10 times better. And so they tried to make lemonade with the lemons they had of going, well, we still want to put it on him. We're going to do it this way. And it's not going to have the same impact. And it doesn't. But I still do think, in my opinion, that it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. Let's talk about 2023, looking ahead here for both companies. What are you guys looking forward to? I mean, on one hand, we may have the biggest match in at least a decade or more in Roman Reigns and The Rock, if it happens. And short of that, expect Cody back. I think we'll really get in WWE. We'll see that experiment play out, and we'll see the heights that Cody Rhodes could reach. In AEW, it's a lot less clear. I'm not sure what the build would be. We haven't seen Bryan Danielson with the title yet, and he's not getting any younger. So you think at some point, I don't know if that is what they build to. Is MJF Bryan Danielson, with Danielson finally getting the title? But as we just touched on, is it the right time to, does MJF need to hold on to that title for all of 2023 to really kind of prove where he's at? Harry, what are you looking forward to in 2023?
Well, AEW is such a murky picture that I can't really discern a direction right now. WWE, you can kind of see the routes they can take. It's all about the bloodline. And like we've said multiple times, I hope they keep that going as much as possible. Other than that, one little thing I'm interested to see is what they do with the Undisputed Championship. Roman's still carrying around the two straps. Do they mean to keep that unified? Is it going to split at some point? Will there be some sort of controversial decision involving Roman where one title goes to someone else? So that's a little something to watch.
I also wonder whether they just kind of complete the whole thing and unify the women's titles, kind of go in the other direction. And there is one world title, one women's title, one tag team title. And then each brand has their secondary men's championship. And, you know, I do think we've seen them be elevated, right? I mean, we saw the World Cup tournament for the Intercontinental title, and it had a feeling of kind of a big deal, and they've done a nice job of building that title, and Gunther's done a great job with it, and Ricochet's been a good contender. And over on Raw, Rollins with the U.S. title feuding with Theory and Lashley. These are big stars, world title caliber stars. And even Theory cashing in the Money in the Bank for the U.S. title, again, helped kind of elevate it. So maybe that's where we're at, is that there's the one world title. There are secondary men's titles that are a bigger deal than they have been in a long time. Kind of what the IC belt was back in the 80s and 90s, where you could headline house shows with it. One women's title, one tag team title. Does that make sense, Brian?
I've been saying that for the longest time. Yeah. I really think this is the time to do it. It definitely looks like they're doing it with the tag titles, because I don't know if you guys have heard, but I've heard that they're going to be unveiling unified belts. So the Usos will now be carrying around one set of belts, apparently. And I just think it's time. One company, one world champion, one world tag team champion, one women's champion. I mean, otherwise, you're watering it down, especially in an all-hands-on-deck scenario right now where you actually do have competition. And maybe they're not as strong as they had been, but it's real competition. You don't have to manufacture your own competition anymore. You have it. One set of champions. They've got enough belts. Like you said, they've got the secondary men's title. I'd even be in favor of, if you have one, women's WWE women's champion, you could have a secondary. You could have a women's intercontinental or something, the way you've got the TBS title in AEW. Yeah. I think that's great. You can do that. They definitely have the division for it, but where it's clear that they're not at the same level. And, I think if there was ever a time to do it, now is the time. I'm not one of those people that goes, oh, you see, look, Roman's got both belts and now the show is boring and there's less. I don't think that's true at all. Not in the slightest. So that's what I would do for sure.
I think they're doing it. I mean, I think we're seeing it in real time. That is what's happening.
Are we getting rid of the gladiator motif finally with the tag team title belts?
Apparently they are. It's going to be some type
Thank goodness.
What I've heard is it's going to be some type of like thing combining. I don't know what this means, but like combining Raw and SmackDown in some way. So it might be like a blue and red belt or something. I don't know. But
like the NXT belt now has elements of blue.
I think that the gladiator thing is out. I've never understood what that was all about, but I think it's going to be ending.
It's like they have these iconic belts from the 80s and 90s, and they keep on moving away from them. And I feel like they always kind of work their way back. I mean, that tag team belt, and I think of it around the waist of the Dream Team, right? Valentine and Beefcake, those big, beautiful belts.
Yeah. World belts.
Yeah, I love those. Those were great. So, Brian, anything else? I mean, what are you expecting out of 2023?
Well, I think, this looks to be a big year for WWE. I think, the prospects of Rock and Roman Reigns, I really do think that is the kind of a feud of an angle and a storyline that is a needle mover, to use a cliche. That's the kind of a thing that the buzz will attract more people to watch those shows who maybe don't always watch them, to be like, to either past fans or even people that aren't hardcore fans who are just like, wow, what are they doing over there right now? There will be that curiosity factor, and they can capitalize on that. I think it's going to be a year where Triple H makes even more of his mark. It'll be the first full year where he's in control. I think you're going to see even more of a distancing from the Vince era of WWE. I think in AEW, yes, it is. This is sort of like, I hate to be like more cliches, but it's like a make or break year where they can try to piece something together and reestablish themselves as being like legit competition, or they're going to fall even further to the point where it starts to almost feel like a TNA situation. And I think the only thing that's preventing that right now from happening sooner is the bottomless pockets of the Khan family, honestly. But there's a danger because look, the numbers, it's the kind of thing where you don't think it's going to happen until it happens. And the minute that the Warner networks go, you know what? We'd probably do numbers that are just as good if we just had a Big Bang Theory marathon on Wednesday nights. Like the minute they feel that, those shows are going to get booted off the networks. So they have to make sure that doesn't happen, that the numbers, even though the numbers are not stellar, they're still better than anything that TBS or TNT is going to put on in those time slots. But as soon as that's not true anymore, they're going to be gone, and it's going to be like, well, someone will pick them up, but it will be a very tarnished brand. And so it's going to be a crucial year for them to try to like really make something happen and scramble.
Yeah, it's a real challenge because it's hard to see what that next thing is for them, right? I mean, there isn't that big piece of talent out there they can get, or that next big idea. So it's really taking what you have, which is good. It's a good product, right? So we're not talking about TNA or WCW when they were at their worst, having to pull the nose up. It's already a good product, but that it is a good product in some ways is more concerning because it's hard to pinpoint what you need to fix. It's like, it is what it is. This is AEW, and I don't see it changing that much. It just feels like kind of the novelty's worn off, right? And they are not the new exciting alternative anymore. They're just the other wrestling company that's on TV, and fans aren't that into it right now, so it's a real challenge. I don't know what that next big thing is, if there is a next big thing. It's just not there. All right, guys, thank you so much, not just for today, but obviously for everything over the years. Always appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys. Wish you and your families the best. That certainly goes for everybody listening and all our PWI readers. Happy holidays. Anything you guys want to plug before we run?
Harry, you want to?
Oh, boy. In the current issue of PWI just coming out, I do analyze the bad use of comedy wrestling. And I targeted UA in particular. And it was kind of funny that the fallout with Nick Aldis just happened a couple weeks later. So Nick Aldis and I did not coordinate our comments, but they've been going a total slapstick on NWA and basically entertaining themselves. And that's the danger of not having a real robust, substantial audience to gauge reaction.
Yeah. We could do a whole other show on the NWA. I've given up on them. I hate to say I was their biggest champion. The Tyrus thing was my line in the sand
for a lot of people.
I'm done.
I mean, I'd love to talk more about some, and maybe that'll be the next episode. We can delve into NWA and Impact and even Ring of Honor. They all have their own stuff going on, and should be interesting 2023 for all of them.
But I've got a couple of things. I know I keep putting off saying I do have a book announcement that I want to make. The contract's not signed yet. Holidays slow things down, but it's going to be a biography. I like the Sheik biography. It's never been done. Someone that's never been done. I think people are really going to be excited. It's somebody that appeals to multiple generations of fans. I think it's going to be very cool. I can't wait to say what it is, but I will hopefully in the weeks to come. Blood and Fire, the biography of the Sheik, is still available, digital, print, audio. You can get that. My podcast, so this is cool, Shut Up and Wrestle, during the Christmas week, I'm going to have Bill Apter as my guest.
Oh, wow,
so
great.
That is something that I hope appeals to a lot of the PWI readers and listeners. But I'll have Bill on, and, I do it every week. It's an old school wrestling podcast that you can find online wherever you get podcasts, and it's a lot of fun. So
excellent. Looking forward to it. All right, guys. Thanks, everybody. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. And we'll see you all in 2023.
Happy holidays.